We're going to be doing this series of device reviews for you, the patient, because ultimately, from OrthoSynthesis to the patient, I want to make sure that I review devices and let you know what they're all about and whether they're optimized for the patients. And so from my standpoint, it's all about what I feel is best for the patient, and it's just my opinion, but I'd like to share things in an unbiased approach and offer these reviews. I've had many patients ask me what kind of plates, instruments, and devices that I use, and I thought, you see it all the time on various technology and gadgets and cars. Well, let's do this for medical devices. So with my background with academic from prior faculty at Stanford, prior FDA medical officer and fellow, as well as experience as a medical director of biotech and extensive clinical and research experience as well as startups, I have the right experience to share with you some of my insight, and I hope you enjoy it. And we're going to be talking about a couple of novel devices today, and I want to share with you the pros and cons and what I think of them. So today we're going to be talking about a couple of devices by Biedermann Motech and review some of the pros and cons, what I like about some of the novel features, and some of the changes that sometimes we even see going through the regulatory space over time compared to some traditional devices that we used to use 10, 15, 20 years ago, and maybe even 5 years ago. So first we're going to be looking at a proximal humerus device. So in this particular plate is a proximal humerus plate. Now you can see it's not just a straight plate, it's not a rectangular plate, it's slightly quadrilateral, it has pre-contoured locations, it is configured to fit a proximal humerus. Now this is our shoulder model, and what you can see is when you apply this plate, and it's intended to go really nice and low, and the reason you want this nice and low on the proximal humerus is you don't want to affect the rotator cuff. So this is the muscle on top. So some of our older plates, they used to come way up here, or inadvertently, if someone were to install these and place these too high, it would impinge when you rotate. So you don't want that. So you want it nice and low. So you want these screws to go up. And so the development of the device really came about for many reasons. There were changes in the plate material, changes in the configuration, as well as overall how it's contoured. And you see that in terms of the screws, as well as some notches that allows you to put sutures, so when you apply the plate, you can actually capture some of the rotator cuff superiorly and posteriorly, and if you need, anteriorly. And the advantage is that you can create a tension-based compression device from just a standard plate configuration. And the plate in its essentially installed mode actually looks like this. So in this particular presentation, you have the screws already in and placed there, and they go in different directions. So you can see here, as I rotate this, they can go either convergent or divergent, and it allows you to really place them at a variable angle. So the advantage is that you can place them where you want, where you think you need them as a physician surgeon, and define where you place them. In addition, you can lock these plates. Now, there are special tools for inserting a cap onto the plate after you put the screw in, as well as a torque limiter that allows you to lock it in place. So once you lock it, it is stuck there. And the reason that's important is you don't want these screws to back out from the holes, and that's important in older osteoporotic bone, and sometimes even in younger bone if you have significant defects for instability or certain defects or missing bone sections where you need that level of stability. But typically you don't always need a locking plate in young hard bone, but you often do in older osteoporotic or fragile bone, as we like to call it. Okay, so that's the proximal humerus plate. And what I like about it is that it's smooth, contoured, and relatively thin. Some of the older plates, I don't necessarily want to say older, some of the plates from various configurations from many years ago were thicker, they were broader, and they weren't pre-contoured. Like many of these newer plate designs, similar to Biedermann Motech and other companies, is that the plate has become thinner, and they've been pre-contoured based on the anatomic design from proximal humerus, from patient CTs or cadaveric CTs through various studies over time. And that allows them to really get as close to an anatomically configured plate as you can. And so the various configurations are similar. You have holes for lining it up, you have suture holes for tissues, and you have a nice plate configuration that allows it to sit relatively well onto the proximal humerus, nice and low, okay? And the other aspect, aside from the variable angle, which is the angle in which you put the screw in, as well as the locking component, you can see here that there are holes in there. So the holes allow me to place a cannula down into the screw, and I can apply a material through that. And by applying the material, it can then go through these various fenestrations into the bone. And traditionally, oftentimes acrylic cement, then it was calcium phosphate cement, and now, and to some extent it may be considered off-label from a regulatory standpoint, but you could potentially add various biologics, some of which are on-label, some of which are off-label, and that would be from a surgeon perspective. But my opinion is that this gives you the advantage, gives the surgeon the advantage to place what he needs or she needs through the fenestrations, and it's solid at the end, and that means that you're not going to penetrate it distally or penetrate through a cartilage hole. It's going to go into the sides where you want it in the bone. Next, we have a distal radius plate. Now this is a lot smaller. However, you can see the configuration. It looks very different from a traditional plate, but it matches the distal radius. Now we have a distal radius here, and you can see that if we were to apply this, it allows us to place this. Now on this particular model, we have parts of it that limit it sitting flush on there, but it allows us to place it and pre-contoured relative to the distal radius. That means less fiddle factor when we go to push this plate in. Now many different companies have gone towards pre-contoured plates that are configured based on anatomic designs from CT data. And again, very similar. The holes, the locking, the pin placement is very similar. It's relatively thin, it's smooth on the edges, so it maintains low profile, because once you put it in the distal radius, you don't want to go back and take it out unless you have to. So in this particular case, you want it low profile, but it's still solid enough that it's not going to break. This also has a unique feature in this particular plate. It has an area where it's slotted, and that allows you some degree of placement flexibility. You can place this, and I'm going to show it to you closer here, is this can rotate 360 degrees. So what that means is that I can place the plate more proximal or more ulnar or more distal or more radial. It all depends, or ulnar. I can put it in any configuration that I want. And it gives me that level of flexibility that allows me to shift the plate relative to the bone if it's not exactly where I want. And this is a unique feature. And so far, I have not seen this particular feature on any other plate. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but this is one other feature I just wanted to mention in the distal radius plate. The actual fixation is still surgeon dictated, but the choice of plate, if you have something that's more configured for anatomic design, then that's what I like to do, and that's what one value of this is. This is the plate with screws installed and delivered in this particular plate. And you can see you have a lot of variability in the pitch and angle that you can place. Some of them are, you can place them as fixed slotted or fixed screws. So either they can go in with threads or without, and they can go in different configurations, all based on anatomical constraints that were developed and reviewed by the FDA prior to being released through a 510(k) release. And a same concept. You have a cap that can lock it, a torque limiter that allows you to tighten it without breaking it. And once it's in place, and this is very useful for both older osteoporotic fragile bone as well as some difficult plate configurations in young bone where you really need solid fixation of small fragments, it allows you to lock it, hold it in place, get your styloid, and you can angle it in different ways to get that, and as well as low profile. And you only need so many holes, and there's just enough holes that you need without getting too many locations for screw placement. And so again, similar advantages to the proximal humerus, similar design, anatomically contoured for the distal radius, the proximal humerus for the proximal humerus plate. Both have similar advantages and disadvantages. This is well contoured. I always like things low profile and smooth, where you have minimalist design. The only one thing I would say in this particular plate is it tends to be more squarish on the sides. Some of the designs have some curves. Is it sexy or not? In the end, it ultimately is based on the surgeon decision making in the operating room. I have used both plates. I've been very happy with them and certainly continue to use them. But again, ultimately your choice in device is really dictated by what's good in the surgeon's hands, what the patient needs are, and what you're comfortable with. And ultimately that's surgeon decision. But these are two different plate configurations for different anatomical locations that I wanted to discuss with you. So proximal humerus plate, distal radius plate by Biedermann Motech is OrthoSynthesis approved. This will be one of many series of device reviews. So give me feedback in the comments below, right there, and I'd love to hear from you.